Gents, I just want to pause the episode for a moment to let you know about the Strong Men of Value Academy. You will have heard me refer to it a number of times, and I want to bring more attention to it. So this isn't just a program, it's a life-changing environment and community of men who are focused on personal and professional growth. We're looking at areas of relationships, wealth, and health, things to help you thrive and maximize your life. Imagine having bi-monthly one-on-one coaching sessions with myself, weekly group coaching calls, and an incredible brotherhood of high achievers by your side. Now we're diving into resilience, leadership, and holistic growth to not just succeed in your career, but to thrive in your health and your relationships. Your journey to greatness, it starts here. So join the movement and you can apply for the Strong Men of Value Academy. You can head to themanthatcanproject.com to find out more. Welcome back, team. Remember, like, share, subscribe if you haven't already. So my name is Lachlan Stuart, and I am the founder and host of the Man That Can Project. And I'm excited to have you guys here supporting our vision and supporting the mission to help men take ownership of their lives, learn to love themselves, and recognize the value that they have to give the world. And we do this through our workshops, podcasts, and coaching. Now, for those who aren't aware, we have recently launched the Breakthrough Online Experience, which is a self-paced program, but it is has new modules released every 6 weeks to help you take ownership for your life and develop some skills that improve your communication, help you overcome limiting beliefs, and really create the vision and set the framework to create the life that you really want to be living. Now, gents, before we dive in, so today's guest is Pierre Azzam, and Pierre is joining me just from north of Miami over in the United States, and is an incredibly talented and intellectual man who comes from a psychiatrist's background and has now moved into coaching. And he's the founder of Braver Man. He founded that 3 years ago. Now, throughout this conversation, there will be conversations around depression and mental illness. So if you are struggling or if this triggers anything, make sure you reach out for professional health, or for those who are here in Australia, Lifeline 13 11 14 is a great line to get onto there, because I'm the first person to put my hand up when I need help, and it's such a powerful thing for us as men and as people to be able to know when that's needed. So, guys, I really appreciate the support, and you're going to take out, we're going to be talking about depression in men, the impacts of depression, right? Fatherhood work, which is a really interesting topic, how depression shows up, okay, and how it can show up differently, but also the emotional wheel and understanding that, everyone is at risk. Okay, and it's really important for us to understand that our emotions can be signals. So enough from me. Let's dive into today's episode with Pierre.
You're listening to the Man That Can Project with Lachlan Stuart, a global movement created to empower men and open up what's really going through their minds by having real and raw conversations about life's unique challenges and our individual ways of processing it all. Welcome to the Man That Can Project.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Man That Can Projects podcast. Today we have a special guest. I was going to say enjoying us, but joining us from north of Miami, and it's really cool how we connected. And we've got Pierre Azzam, who is the founder of Braver Man Coaching. And for those who haven't heard of Braver Man Coaching, definitely jump on Instagram, where you've probably seen me share a number of Pierre's posts. Now, very insightful, highly educated, and such a powerful story. And I'm so grateful that we got to connect. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have your knowledge on the show is you come from a professional background, and obviously still hugely knowledgeable, but you've sort of transitioned into the coaching space and into the men's space, which is going to be exciting to sort of hear why you made that transition and how you sort of educate your audience, and myself included, with joining the science of things together and making it really understandable for everyday people like myself included. So, Pierre, thanks so much for coming on and giving up your time. I'm excited for what we're going to learn. We're going to talk about depression in men and a few sort of key points around that, which will be awesome. But how are you, mate? How have you been going over the last couple of days?
Yeah, things have been going pretty well over here. In the States today is Super Bowl Sunday, so things are active in their own unusual way in the world of coaching. So things have been really quite different over the last year, and over the last year, particularly in the United States, as much of the country's been pretty hard hit with COVID and lockdown, and so I think that has been an opportunity for certain to connect with men over the experience of isolation and depression. So I'm excited to be here, excited to talk to you.
Likewise, mate. So talk us through, give us a quick background for the audience listening. And, I've been fortunate to have a conversation with yourself, but I guess one sort of moment in your life that led you to get into the professional field, and then obviously where that journey has led you to now through founding Braver Man Coaching, and what you sort of are excited to bring to the space, obviously through depression and your various other things.
Yeah. So my background is really in the medical space initially. So I'm a physician by trade. And I became really interested in psychiatry when I was in medical school, but I didn't have the sort of predilection to go after a career in psychiatry until probably about midway through medical training, and that was about the time that I was first diagnosed with major depression, and I think part of my decision to pursue psychiatry as opposed to another medical field had a lot to do with being able to experience what it was like to be depressed, to see the impact of a very common mental health condition on my own life, but also on the lives of individuals whom I was treating. And so I am from Texas originally and trained in psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh. Spent a little bit of time in Boston to train a little extra in the overlap of psychiatry and other medical conditions, and then worked mostly in a combination between the overlap of psychiatry and palliative care, so working with people at the end of life or through major medical conditions, and teaching, which I really love and have really been able to infuse into the coaching work. And so I worked as a psychiatrist for about 15 years and became interested in coaching just over the last 3. Part of that was a small part of my job as a psychiatrist was working with moms during pregnancy and shortly thereafter, and becoming interested in what was available for fathers, or really the lack thereof. I think Australia and New Zealand have kind of led the way in terms of fatherhood work, but in the States, even in a very very well-equipped, highly regarded medical center, there's very little for fathers in terms of mental health. That led me to gain some interest in working with men in mental health, in sort of traditional mental health care. And a big part of that led me to a recognition of the value of the coaching model. So I sought training and coaching, really looking to work predominantly with men at the time of early fatherhood. And so I started Braver Man about 3 years ago. It has morphed really into not just working with new dads, but working with men at times of major life change. This year, a lot of that has been navigating pandemic. A good chunk of that has also been around job change and job loss, and also grief and losing family members. And so really, I've been fortunate to be able to work with men at times of all sorts of transitions. And my background has certainly informed a big chunk of that work. So I felt really fortunate to be able to bring that both personally and also professionally into the coaching realm.
That's awesome, and thanks for sharing that. I think it's such a great mix to bring that professional approach in, and obviously utilizing, I guess, the best of both worlds, because everything can always continue to evolve, and nothing is perfect. So I think what you bring is exciting. I'm excited to follow your journey and learn from you as well, for maybe ways that I can show up better and I can improve better. But diving in, I guess, to the depression in men, and you mentioned obviously early fatherhood, and fatherhood is sort of an area as well. There's definitely a lot of dads in our group and community and people who listen to this. But does depression show up differently, do you feel, for fathers as opposed to regular men, or is there any sort of patterns that you've noticed, or is it just random?
Yeah, I think there are similar patterns, but the context of the way in which some of the symptoms of depression will show up often are a bit different in the space of being a new father, transitioning in a relationship potentially with mom or with partner. And so there are a lot of overlapping features of depression between non-fathers and new fathers. So a bit of overlap between perinatal paternal depression and major depression in men. But a lot of the features and the themes tend to be a bit different. There's certainly more focus on what happens in the space of being a good father. One of the biggest features of depression tends to be changes in thought patterns and feelings of guilt, feelings of helplessness or worthlessness. For men, a big tendency to, and I noticed this in myself too when I've experienced depression in the past, a really big tendency to be very critical. And so for fathers, a big part of that is self-criticism around parenting, self-criticism about being available to kid and to mom, or kid and to partner. The themes are a little bit different, but the symptoms tend to be very similar.
With that self-critical thinking, I know I am challenged with that definitely fairly regularly, but it's learning how to regulate that. But from what you've noticed and what you've seen, is there any times in life where people are more critical, or maybe certain environments that they're in, or patterns that are going on in their life that maybe, not force is probably not the word, but people are more critical on themselves? Is there any sort of patterns that people can maybe be aware of for themselves personally, or for people in their life around that self-critical thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly there are definitely patterns of the way in which depression shows up in men. And self-criticism is a big part of that. Being, having a tendency to experience a tremendous amount of shame tends to be pretty common for men as well. And so I think that might start just with outlining how depression might show up. Maybe that's a good place to begin around that discussion.
Let's do that.
So, yeah, I'm happy to dig into that.
Be awesome. I'm just taking some notes.
Yeah, no worries. So depression is pretty heterogeneous as a condition. The diagnosis itself requires the experience of low mood and loss of interest in things, hobbies, tasks that you'd normally find interesting for more than a couple of weeks, with at least 4 additional symptoms. And the big ones tend to be changes to sleep and appetite and concentration, motivation, movement, suicidal thinking, guilty or worthless thoughts. And so the combination, there are a lot of symptoms there, and that's definitely not comprehensive. And so even among those symptoms that would be required to make a diagnosis, you could have over 200 different combinations of the symptoms or the syndrome of depression. And that doesn't even include a lot of the features that tend to be more common and misidentified in men. And so as I name those features, I think a lot of the men listening, probably also some of the ladies who are listening, will recognize some of these features in themselves or the men they know. And those a lot of those features include anger, attacks of anger in particular, getting really irritable, testy, snappy, lashing out in ways that wouldn't be normal for them. I know it's certainly something that I found myself experiencing. Rather than being, many of us can experience sluggishness, but a lot of men will experience irritability, feeling restless, just kind of feeling on edge, but not really knowing why, not having a great reason why. There is a tendency to externalize and reach out to substances or to sex or to gambling, risky behaviors that might help to numb the experience, but only often serve to worsen the experience and to put people at risk. And then there's also a big tendency to avoid interaction, to withdraw. And so there's a bit of research to suggest and really to question whether depression shows up differently in men, whether the actual features of depression are different in men versus women, or whether a lot of the features of depression are responded to differently by men and women, just based on our natural tendencies. And I say natural, but really they're socialized tendencies, right? So most guys grow up with at least some exposure to traditional norms of masculinity that support the value of being stoic, of working through pain, of not showing emotion, of toughing it out. And so naturally, we then get socialized to externalize some of the experiences that we have when they're really uncomfortable, because we're not usually invited to have conversations around our emotions, which is, I think, one of the big reasons why I found myself attracted to the Men That Can Project and the Inner Circle, because the conversations are really about digging deep, and that's unfortunately not common. And so when we experience depression, when guys like us experience depression, then it becomes harder to reach out for help. It's harder even to identify when it's happening or what's happening. Much of the time, like, the expression of how we're feeling is hard enough to pin down. I know for me it is. Like, I think if you ask me at any point, how am I feeling, I probably will give you a generic fine.
Definitely relate there. And I know a lot of the listeners, everything that you were saying there, how it can show up with anger or acting out in certain ways, is I witness it all the time, and I've acted in certain ways, and it sort of ties into what you were just saying then. You know, emotion is something that we experience on a daily basis. It's like the seasons, and they're always coming and going, but we're never taught how to, I guess, perceive them, understand them, manage them, or use them. So because that's, we don't ever develop those skills, and this is once again generalizing. When it happens, we freak out, or we do what you said, where we sort of shut off to the world because it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to feel like this. Like the real men get through this. The real men don't cry. The real men don't share all this excitement. I guess something tying into that, Pierre, was Maddie, one of the guys in the inner circle. It's very rare that I hear men go, I actually just love spending time with my kids. And not saying that the men don't love doing that. It's just, I think it just is a conversation that we're used to saying, oh, I can't wait for the kids to go back to school or something like that. And Maddie and I were having a conversation the other week, and he was just like, I love my time with my son. And it's sort of threw a firecracker in the conversation, because I was already preloaded with a response to what I was expecting him to say.
Yeah.
And he wears his heart on his sleeve. And you're right, there are more men really starting to understand and get connected with their emotions, and depression being one of them as well. But how do we know what it is if no one talks about it? Like, so how do you, obviously, you've shared sort of how it shows up, but what do you feel, or from your experience with all the people that you've worked in, when are times that we're at greatest risk? So once again, we can start looking out for ourselves and being aware of ourselves, but also keeping an eye on those closest to us.
Yeah. So early fatherhood is a big time of risk that is starting to be more readily understood. So about 1 in 10 men will experience postnatal depression in the first year. Yeah. And it's quite amazing too, because when mom experiences depression, so when a mom will experience postnatal depression, that rate shoots up to somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 4 men. And so you can imagine then the risk of a child in the first year having both parents be depressed is quite high. And naturally, one of the protecting factors for relationships and for moms when they experience depression is fathers who are euthymic, or fathers who aren't depressed. And so when moms experience depression, the rates of depression in dads is quite high. And so the family as a unit becomes at risk. And so I think I can't overstate the importance of screening mom and dad. Really, the rates of screening globally for mom, who is more likely to experience depression than dad, is already quite low. The rates of screening for fathers is quite low as well. And so I think that we can do lots of wonderful things just by making sure that we appropriately screen for moms and dads in the first year. Other big times are times of loss. So whether that be relationship loss or bereavement, someone close to us dying, losing a job, any major time of transition or shift can become a time of risk. And any time of greater substance use becomes a time of greater risk. Any time of greater social isolation becomes a time of greater risk. And so I think we're finding in an era of pandemic that there are lots of risks right now. And so one of the important things about encouraging the work that we're doing and the work that you're doing in the Man That Can Project is really helping men to connect, especially in times in which they might be in lockdown. And so that becomes really, really important as well. There are a slew of medical conditions as well, even common ones that can lead to depression. And so keeping an eye on symptoms really, I I wish it were as simple as just looking at one particular time in
Yeah.
a man's life. But really, nobody. I mean, I think probably the biggest and most important point to note is none of us is risk-free. There's no man who in his entire life will not be at risk. Many men may not experience, but we're all at risk for experiencing. And so keeping an eye on loved ones, on your mates becomes really important.
I think that's a really important part to highlight there. That and I was probably going to tie that back into getting the screening for mental health or postnatal depression for both men and women is such an important thing, because we could, and myself included, I'll use myself as an example. I could say, I've got everything in place and I practice and preach this day in, day out, but I'm still at risk. We're all still at risk. And as you mentioned, those significant changes in life, or maybe even, and significance, once again, is a word that's relevant to you as an individual. Don't say, oh, because he went through this, mine's insignificant. I don't like it when people say that. It's
Sure.
Is what it is for you. But understand that we are at risk. So we need to start educating ourselves in this and starting to put the work in now, rather, prevention is always better than cure. Yeah. So there was a gentleman that came to one of our men's groups, James, and he's like, I've never experienced mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, anything like that, but I've come along tonight because you never know. He's like, it's like the gym. You could be the fittest person in the world, and if you stop exercising, you might get sick. Yeah. So, learning the tools, learning to communicate, being around people who are uplifting, who are sharing some of their stuff, is always building on your toolkit for better mental and emotional well-being. Which is highly important. So in terms of those screenings, Pierre, like how can people, and obviously America and Australia might be a little bit different here, so everyone do their own research, but how do you go about making sure those screenings happen, like obviously from early fatherhood, but then also for the general public?
Yeah, so that's challenging, and I wish there were a simple solution to this one. For fathers, a big a fair bit of work has been done to validate some of the tools. The Edinburgh postnatal depression scale is probably the most well-used scale, and the encouragement is for screening of both moms and dads at well child visits or well baby visits within the first year. That's probably the biggest way to do that. For men at large, that's a challenge, because at least in the States, the biggest potential source of screening in primary care providers or general practitioners are also squeezed for time. And so there are a few screening tools. Probably some of the common ones are the patient health questionnaire, the PHQ-2 or PHQ-9. There are a few other ones as well that can be implemented in medical settings. But that's a good question, because I think short of the medical setting, there's not a lot of opportunity to go about screening people in the community. And so we rely on, because so much of the experience is subjective, and a lot of it doesn't happen in times of risk. Like I will say, my own experience, Lachie, has been that my symptoms of depression, my episodes of depression, they've sometimes been triggered by major events, but most of the time they've come out of the blue. They've been insidious. They've been really slow. I barely recognize that they're happening. Other people will recognize it in me before I recognize it in myself. They'll notice I might be more slow. I might flake more frequently on appointments. I might, or like social kind of gatherings, I may avoid more frequently. I might be more pessimistic. People know often even before I do. And for men, this is a challenging thing, because the words we use, like there's a lot of research that's been done on depression, but most guys don't use the words that we use in the professional realm. I don't use the words that we use in the professional realm to describe how I'm feeling. Usually, like when I get depressed, my experience is of feeling completely depleted. I feel fatigued, worn down. I'm more likely to say I'm exhausted, or I'm burnt out. I may throw myself into things like work. And then at the same time also be highly critical of myself in the process. But my tendency isn't to get really sad or tearful. Actually, a lot of men don't. And part of that might be the experience of, the socialization around not showing emotion and not crying. But a big part of it may actually be the male experience of depression, which may be more a feeling of emptiness or depletion or fatigue than sadness. And sometimes that involves anger or irritability or lashing out or frustration. That's really common. And so if you go straight by the book and you screen a man who may be depressed, he might not have the core features that would land him a diagnosis of depression. Even if, someone who were interacting with him, a mental health professional interacting with him, would be able to pick up on signs and symptoms of depression. So part of the challenge with screening men for depression is just how we approach it. What are the terms that we use? How do we call things? How do we even identify what we're experiencing ourselves when for so long we've been socialized to bottle up emotions, to maintain stoicism, to work through challenges without expression.
Is there any things there that you feel we can do? Like one of the key things I took from that was learning how to identify what we are feeling. It was something that I struggle with, and an exercise that I generally recommend people to do is, if you're into technology, doing a Facebook Live. For one of the reasons, it obviously puts you out there, but it puts that fear of being seen and not feeling like you know how to. The amount of men that go, I just don't know how to say what I'm feeling, and I used to be that person. And for me, that was just an excuse to not have a go at learning the right words to explain. And, we're always going to, I do this to this day. I say things and I may not have the best choice in words, or I may get confused, or it may not describe how I feel or what I'm trying to get across as maybe best as I can. But by having a go, I can then reflect on what I just said and go, actually, if I were to be able to have the opportunity to say that again, this is how I would do it. And that's taught me to get better. So for a lot of guys now, I always give them exercises where it puts them in that situation where they have to start saying it, and they've trip, fumble, and curse at me sometimes. But then after it, they're like, the feedback has been awesome. My partner is so proud of me for having a go to really articulate. I didn't get it across how I wanted to, but I made the effort. And now I know what words I'm looking to use next time. And so I guess for people, how do you, or what are some ways that you feel that as men or people in general, we can really start to understand and get better at articulating what it is that we're feeling, or even just not even articulating, just understanding what we're feeling, because all these emotions are normal. I guess we're trying to put a label on it for ourselves. So how do you is there any tips, tools, or strategies that can help us with that?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that you push guys to and call them forward to name their own experiences of emotion. Because I think that most of the time when we name emotion, many men will either give a judgment call, I feel good, or I feel bad. Or they'll give a thought. And I'm guilty of this as much as any other man. Instead of saying, I feel angry, I might say, I feel like I should have done something differently. Well, that's not an emotion per se. It's a thought, it's a judgment. And this happens a lot in conversations. And so just because we start the sentence with I feel doesn't usually mean that we finish it with an actual feeling. It might be I feel, if we're talking about a partner, a wife or a partner or a girlfriend, you might say I feel like she should have, or I feel or I feel like I should have. It's an introspective experience. But the invitation to actually name a feeling is rare for us. And so part of it is just modeling. So I love that you do this in advance of calling the men with whom you work forward to do it for themselves, because you're effectively modeling. I am a man who who recognizes I might not have been able to do this very well in my life before, but I'm taking actions to actually name my experience of emotion. And I think this is a big part of where group work with other men becomes really important, because you're seeing a man whom you respect and respect as a fellow man do something that feels uncomfortable or vulnerable, or frankly, something that for me for years led me to, I would have like panic attacks and sweats and just the thought of being a center of attention around what I'm experiencing, despite the fact that much of my work involved probing about how other people are experiencing themselves and their lives and their feelings. When the tables were turned and it was on me, it was it was a sweat fest. It was terrible. And so it's only been recently that I've been able to do it. And I think a big part of that is checking into what's happening physically. Emotions are absolutely normal. We all experience them. We judge some as more masculine, more feminine, some as good, some as not good, some as beneficial or not beneficial, some as comfortable and some as uncomfortable. But really, emotions are just signals to us for how to respond to the world around us. And so part of the reason that we may not have words for it is just the lack of invitation to name what we're experiencing. But many times people can tell. Like, I don't have a very good poker face. I can't hide what I'm experiencing. I may not be able to have the immediate awareness to what I'm feeling in the moment, but my face will say it. And so people in my life will say, you're angry, you're pissed off, even before I'm able to recognize it. And so a big part of it is just recognizing what happens in your body in any given moment. And so rather than trying, and I think this is a big part of why I've enjoyed the coaching realm a fair bit, and why I think much of, and I think many of my colleagues in the mental health field are also embracing to some extent how to approach navigating experiences of feeling for men. A big part of that is just awareness to what's happening in your face, in your eyes, in your throat, in your neck, in your shoulders, in your chest. Are you breathing? Is there fullness? Is there warmth? Is there tightness? Are you closed off? Are you hunched over? Is your backbone, is it activated? Are you sitting upright? Are you fidgeting? what is the bodily experience? That's usually a little easier to navigate and to name. And then with awareness to that can sometimes come awareness to naming what that feeling may be. And so for some men, that's a matter of even just gaining the language for feeling. We might have 4 or 5 words to describe how we're feeling.
Exactly.
And they might all be pissed off. They might all be anger words. And so there are some tools around the many different words of feeling. And so you can Google emotion wheel, and you'll see all sorts of descriptors for feelings and words that might describe feeling. Now, I don't find myself digging super deep into the feelings just for the sake of it. I find much of the time that's a little off-putting for most men. I think I would be a little off-put of just always going into the feeling realm. But there are times when it's really important. It guides a decision or it guides an interaction. You're interacting with your partner because you're feeling some particular way and you can't recognize it. And even just naming, I'm angry, gives it a little less control over how you show up, how you use that anger. And so even guys who don't like going down the road of digging into feelings can appreciate that unless you can appreciate the feeling that's happening, it might have you by the balls. You might not be able to take action in the way that you want because you're overcome with anger or you're overcome with sadness.
You see that play out in so many men's relationships. The amount of men that I speak to, that anger grabs them by the balls and may make them say something to their partner that they really instantly regret, but obviously you can't take back some things, and it continues to happen in various areas of their life where they lash out. And it's as you were saying, these emotions that we experience, once we give it a label, essentially, it doesn't have as much control over us because we're acknowledging what's there. And you also mentioned that emotions are signals. I think that's fantastic. And then the beauty that allows for us as men and as individuals is we've identified it, it's signaling something, and we get to perceive what that means. Are we perceiving it in a way that disempowers us and holds us back, maybe keeps us in a rut? Or can we flick the switch and perceive it in a way where we're going to go, okay, well, the anger here is for a reason, and I can change this if I choose to, one, acknowledge it, or one, I'm aware of it, I can acknowledge it, now I can change it. It's not always comfortable, but let's do something. I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling excited even, right? Because excitement can very often be blended with nervousness and some emotions that maybe hold you back, but they're so close on, I guess, that emotional scale that, am I nervous or am I just bloody excited?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Am I anxious? Am I excited? And we get to shift that based on a lot of its perspective. Obviously, you said you don't want to always dive into the emotion, but if there's something that you feel is causing you a great deal of not necessarily distress, but it may be holding you back from where you want to be in your life, or maybe where you want to be in a certain situation. And that's when going, okay, well, how am I perceiving this emotion right now? How am I using it? How am I managing it? And it's check out the emotional wheel, because if you can learn to label it, that's going to, as Pierre said, I've never actually looked at the emotional wheel, so I'm going to Google that after. But
there are a few.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
Is there any that you recommend, or?
One of the, I can't recall. I think it's the Plutchik, or starts with a P. That's an interesting emotion. I'll send it to you after we're done. I'll look it up.
Yeah, awesome.
I think it's the Plutchik emotion wheel. And either way, I'll send it to you so that you can can put a link to it in the podcast. But there are so many of them, and what's fascinating is most of us don't use most of them, the words that are there in typical conversation, but they're so important. I think a big part of the connection process, probably what many partners are craving out of their male partners, is the ability to connect in a meaningful way. And a big part of that is just even communicating our own experiences, and in ways that feel a little bit vulnerable, and at the same time, not so much so that they make us pause or stop. It's always a little bit of importance of creating challenging goals, but not ones that squash us or ones that hold us back. And I think just even the ability to communicate, I'm sad, is huge. Yeah.
And it's,
even thinking about that for myself, it's rare that I admit that when it's happening. And so I'm just even recognizing the power of that in the moment, and also the challenge of it, because it's not easy. Most men would rather, myself included, bottle it up.
That's one of the challenging things. Is it's very vulnerable to admit those things based on preconceived ideas around what it means, or along the lines of that. But it's also one of the most freeing things when you can actually allow yourself to feel that, and even open up to someone else like that. Like, I think so many of us are trying so hard not to be seen as who we are as individuals, that we're playing this game where we're just walking on a flat line of emotion. We're not allowing ourselves to hurt because we don't want to be vulnerable, but in doing so, we're not allowing ourselves to really experience the brilliant emotions, right? The excitement, the love, everything that the happiness, everything that we're all striving towards, because we're not focused on what could be. We're so focused on what we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And
yeah, very much so.
And that might be the work that we need to do. And as you said before, Pierre, it's like, we don't want to set goals that crush us. We don't want to put ourselves in situations that overwhelm us, but we maybe need to go, okay, well, this is, tying it back in, we've acknowledged this, we've accepted this about ourselves and where we're at, what we're feeling. What is the next step for me? Maybe I need to go see Pierre and learn a few different things, or maybe I need to even, the power of podcasts, and there's so many tools and resources out there that can help with anything, right? If you're wanting to learn to communicate better, you can listen to podcasts and listen to the language or the way, the tonality and voice. If there's, you don't like what's going on with your self-talk, there's tools and resources you can do there. You can even play affirmations on your phone. There's all these things that we can do. It's just, how do we, I guess, build the discipline essentially to create those new habits? How do you find for men, and this can be the early, I guess, let's say the new fathers, the long-time fathers, or the non-fathers, how is there a pattern or a point in which you see men starting to reach out for help or seek help?
Yeah. Often the patterns that I've seen, I think, have changed in the last few years. Traditionally, the patterns of reaching out have been, especially in the realm of mental health, have been when there's a breaking point. So there's something major at stake, whether that's a relationship or a job or substance use of some sort. Usually it takes a lot, or at least historically, what I've seen has been that it's often taken a lot. And that is, in many ways, what's classically been written about how men interact with mental health services, that we're very reluctant to seek help. A big part of that is just how approachable services like mental health care are to men. And I think a big part of my push as a mental health professional has been really to advocate for mental health care and mental health care providers to shift the way we approach men, rather than expecting guys to change their language or their approach or their tendency to be able to experience feeling for the sake of their therapist. Like, really, we're there for our patients or our clients, not the other way around. And so gradually, and I think much more so over the last few years, especially with the accessibility of things like podcasts and social media and platforms for helping that are non-traditional in terms of the mental health field. There's been less stigma on men leveling up. Even the language around seeking personal improvement, personal development, self-work feels much more approachable to men. And so what I've seen has been that men have been less reluctant, more willing to engage, and especially in group work. Part of the big dynamic and the value of group work is really that even though we hold ourselves to these, many of us hold ourselves to these unreasonable expectations of wanting to appear like we have it all together, and we show up in this very perfect way. I wanted to show up in this very perfect way for you, Lachlan, but the reality is that if I showed up in a completely perfect way in my head, I probably wouldn't, that would sacrifice the connection. And so, like, one of the really beautiful things about getting men into groups is just quickly, there's the natural sizing up of guys to one another and wanting to make sure that you say the right thing, or you show up in in the most manly way possible. You don't show up in a very vulnerable way. The recognition quickly becomes, if you show up as this perfect person, you're not going to connect very well. People aren't going to see through that, because nobody is perfect. And B, it's hard to connect to people who have everything in their lives together, because there's this constant thought that, well, what are they going to see in me as a friend or a coach or therapist or whatever? And I guess in the therapy realm, there's less back and forth. But in the friend realm and in the group realm, there's a lot of back and forth. So there's some strong value to being able to not only model vulnerability and what a masculine vulnerability would look like, there's just greater likelihood that you're going to make a connection if you don't show up like you've got your shit together, like everything is perfect, because that's not life for most of us.
To be fair, I don't think it's life for anyone. It's we hide behind these facades, these masks, because we want to appear, as you said, Pierre, perfect. But if we think about all the things we've got juggling in our life, from our physical health to our finances to our relationships to like all these different areas, it's impossible to be giving 100% attention to all of those at once. It's not possible. Yeah. So there's always something we can improve on. There's always going to be some unbalance or unrest in an area of our life which we're looking to improve upon. But for often, let's use the example, or the common one that we see is the dad bod, right? Like people sacrifice their health. And I work with a lot of people who are hugely successful in various areas of their life, but they've sacrificed their health. And to show up and say, hey, I'm not happy with my body image, or I'm not comfortable going to the beach to take my shirt off. That's a real thing. And that's something that a lot of us experience. It's something that a lot of us experience, but a lot of us don't talk about. We don't let that barrier down. But if we all, if someone starts that conversation, you watch the waterfall of conversations that follow, because we're all experiencing similar things. The way I like to look at it is we're all as equally fucked up as each other. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. Like, that's what's exciting about life, because I can learn so much from where you're challenged or where you're struggling, and vice versa. And then we can help build each other up. And the work never stops, because life is, look how quickly technology is evolving. Life's moving equally as fast. Our priorities are changing, and what worked for me 5 years ago may not work for me now. And that's okay. But if we keep moving together, and sharing our experiences, it's only going to raise the standard of everyone around us. It's a win-win. Like, there's no, I don't want to share what my diet is or whatever, because if you end up looking better than me, that's ridiculous. It doesn't work like that. Or
no, not at all.
Like,
not at all. The same goes with most things. I mean, maintaining this idea of abundance and the capacity to share with one another and help one another to grow is probably the most fulfilling part of my work now, more than ever. Yeah. Because we maintain these ideas of wanting to show up as the perfect man so frequently, and yet the recognition is very quickly in a group. Nobody is, even the people onto whom we project the sort of ideals of perfection, they're not perfect. And the things that connect us are very much the parts of us that are authentic. And so whether that is parts of us that are that we feel very proud of, or parts of us that we're working on, that level of authenticity is really the glue that binds these groups. And so I think that just underscores the importance of being authentic and also being vulnerable. Yeah.
100%, couldn't agree more. And we're the role models and leaders for the next generation. Everyone's experienced some form of pain in their life. Like, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And fortunately or unfortunately, maybe the generation before us didn't share a lot of that, what that pain was like, or maybe what they would have done differently. It's just like, we don't talk about that. That's done. I'm still struggling with it, but we don't talk about it. And we've seen how it worked for us. A lot of us have got challenges, but if we can recognize one of the problems, we can start being a part of the solution to change that through voicing what life is really like for us. Because your experience, Pierre, of life is completely unique and incredible to you. And I would love to learn from it equally as much as mine is unique to me. And we're all experts in something that someone else isn't. And if we start viewing people like that, it's like, I can learn so much. Everyone has the opportunity to give and to lead, and the power to help. And I'm sure you can definitely relate to this, Pierre, but by having these conversations, by challenging people, by creating the space, so you're potentially giving someone a dad that's connected, someone, a loving partner who generally knows how to show affection and show what their partner needs, and a mate that can read through the lines. Like, we're all chasing love and connection. Deep down, that's what we want. And for the people who are listening who haven't, I guess, started investing in yourself in the form of whether it's podcasts, books, seminars, all of that sort of stuff. Well, clearly you are if you're listening to this podcast, but you're creating a better life for everyone that's around you. You have the ability to raise the standards. Yeah. And if you think about what Pierre's shared, obviously around how it, the depression can show up in yourself, and maybe for those that are closest to you, and how it shows up differently, but more so how you can screen it for yourself and tying it into that emotional, I guess, intelligence, and be okay with that everyone is at risk. There potentially could be something that happens in your life in the future that then puts you in a position where you're struggling with your mental well-being, and that's okay. It's a part of life, and there's the physiological responses, the social responses, and various other responses that cause us to feel that way. But if we start putting in the work now and doing some of the things that Pierre said, and I guess if you start checking in with your emotions now, when they're working well, when things go south, which, everything goes up and downs, just like the tide, you're better equipped to deal with that. But if we just wait till, as you said, Pierre, most people wait, and I always, you called it the breaking point, I call it rock bottom. If we just wait till then to start doing the work or to start asking out for help, sometimes it's we make it a lot harder on ourselves than it needs to be.
Most certainly.
So
I'd say too, the rock bottom is often when, I think especially for people who experience major depression, much of the experience is driven by neuropathology. And so hard as you may try, at least in my experience, and certainly in the experience of many of the men with whom I worked, at the point of rock bottom, the disease itself, it in many ways sort of supports itself, meaning it propagates itself. A big part of the condition is withdrawal and not engaging, feelings of guilt and feelings of worthlessness. And so our responses to that are usually to distance ourselves from social interactions, to avoid proper engagement in physical activity and good nutrition, also to avoid seeking help. And so in many ways, it becomes impossible in the moments of rock bottom to fully rely on our capabilities of reaching out to other people, because the disease itself keeps us from the capacity to do that. And so in very much the same way that you're going to work your muscles in advance of, in advance of a tournament, or you're going to train for a marathon, being able to train your awareness around your emotions when things are just fine helps you to do that more readily, or at least we think helps you to do that more readily in moments in which you might be at rock bottom.
Well said. Very well said. So Pierre, I wanted to ask you one last question before we wrap up. What is your definition of being a man?
Oh, yeah. So this is a tough one. I think it's a tough one, and not a tough one in many ways. I've held some of the popular beliefs that all men are real men. And so, and I will stick to that one, because I think there's so much charge in what is it in the meaning of manhood. And the reality of our experiences are usually that definition for us keeps us from believing that we are real men, unless we do something or other. And so I think the definition of what it means to be a good man in my eyes is one who has awareness to strengths and faults, one who shows up with compassion and presence and goodwill, and one who contributes to the world in service to communities and families, effectively leaving the world a better place. And so I guess that would be my breakdown of what I would view for myself as being a good man, while also supporting the fact that manhood shows up differently for all of us. We can unite around some of those common features and celebrate, I think, some of the unique attributes of each of us as a man.
Thanks for sharing that. I really want to highlight also what you said there, and it does show up in various ways and essentially meanings for all of us. And that's the important part to highlight. There's the stereotypes, and often a lot of us become, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, resentful to that because maybe we don't live up to that. And I fell in that boat. I tried to fit into it. It didn't work for me, and it made me an angry young man. And I've realized that we all have our own meaning for it. And that's completely, and that's why I love hearing everyone's, I guess, perspective on it, because there's going to be someone out there who goes, you just hit the nail on the head for me, Pierre. And that's exactly what it means to me. And there's also going to be people who go, no, I might tweak that. And regardless, it's all good. I think it's important to understand that we are all unique and different in our own ways, and that's okay. If everyone was the same, it would be like playing The Sims or something, the Truman Show. I don't know. But Pierre, where can we find you on social platforms, websites, all that sort of stuff, if people would like to reach out to you?
Sure. So my site is www.bravermancoaching.com, and probably easiest finds on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram's handle is @braver.man. And Facebook is a quick search @Braverman Coaching.
Perfect. They'll all be available in the show notes. So for those listening along, or if you're on YouTube, just click the links below. But Pierre, thank you so much for making some time available to share all of that. I've got a huge page of notes here, and I've taken a lot away. So I'm really looking forward to listening this over again.
Likewise. Lucky, thank you so much.
All right, team, thank you for tuning in. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and if you've got a moment to leave a review, please do so. It helps more men from all around the world see the value in these episodes that we have to give. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the Man That Can Project podcast. My name is Lachlan Stuart, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did, please take a moment to rate and review the Man That Can Project on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our newest episodes. We'll see you again next time.